Thank you very much for the invitation. I think we're both excited to speak to a room full of engineers more often than not. It's to like other architects. So I think we've tweaked the presentation a bit too to talk a lot about how we've moved towards engineering and seen some of the need in Kigali and in East Africa with our work to build our own team down there. Tim White's in the room. He's actually probably our founding engineer now with Arup as well. So shout out to Tim, and you'll see how this has kind of grown. I think that the structure of the talk is based a little bit about how we're thinking about design, architecture, engineering, and broadening the conversation around what we are doing ultimately in the construction industry as professionals, and how we can to really hold ourselves accountable, and also at a time where I think we are often under scrutiny. I certainly was this afternoon about our fees, about how we're actually accounting for ourselves quite literally, and also how we can expand how we account for our services and what we do in different ways. So I actually own a house around the corner from this guy in Walthamstow, and famously, this is one of our heroes, I think, in Mass, is that as Morris said, that nothing should be made by the labor degrading to the makers. And really understanding back to construction and its relationship to the community and that it sits within and the people that make it. This in contrast to remarks that have obviously come after have undergone a lot of fire about it, but not really pointing the finger necessarily at Zaha here, but more at that someone with her clout feels a lack of power in a situation, which really speaks to the role of an architect or engineer, that they don't feel that they can do anything about a construction site. I think another one of our heroes is Giancarlo De Carlo. And back, this is 40 years ago, but looking again at contemporary architecture and my profession, that we tended to think about what we were doing in a very narrow sense and not really broadly about, again, its relationship to broader society here. And at this point, this is 40 years ago, and I think it's pretty ironic that it's as salient now as it was then. The risks of dependency and megalomania leading to social political indifference. I gave a talk a couple months ago at the Museum of Architecture the day after this had come out. And again, I think this is interesting that one of the heroes, Sir Norman Foster and his firm would lose a case about a project that ran well over budget, and ultimately the decision was made in the court that it was their fault, but that their defense was it wasn't our responsibility. We were not in charge of cost and quantities, which I think would be a core responsibility of any design firm. And the defense, though, that put up was ultimately lost, even though basically the client had taken away that power from them. They were still accountable for it. Again, this is like a guy with Sir in front of his name that doesn't have the clout as a profession to have that within their scope of services. And lastly, certainly not one of my heroes, would be the comment again at the end of it, which is that our role as architects and engineers and in the construction industry, as though that social justice is not part of our competency, and we would certainly think that is the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. So how can we, architects and engineers, expand our role? How can we account for what we are doing more broadly? I think the easy thing to point at that has been around for a long time, pretty sure it's in the UK as well, is the LEED system. This is an easy way for us to say our work has value and it achieves certain, we have a platinum standard. And to a degree, this has really helped both building owners and developers and architects and everybody else point to, yes, we are achieving what we sent out to do. You do this through a kind of very simple box ticking exercise that you can kind of, score yourselves and pay for more points here and here, and you're ultimately, this is an accounting for what you're doing, and you can say that is good design. We are green, right? What we at Mass were looking at was, okay, what are all the different ways, the kind of leads of the world, what's out there right now for us to account? Because we are working with NGOs and health professionals in professions that their funding is really much based on data. They have to show results to get re-upped every year on their annual, like what kind of outcomes are they having with patients based on their annual contribution. So us as architects and engineers were like, well, we ought to be doing that too. And what is out there? So these are all the different kind of forms of lead that exist that we could find. And what we saw was that they're all kind of in this, like, they're very specialized. The lead's very much about environmental impact. And you got some things that are about health and happiness, and a few things about beauty, like, you get published, that's formal beauty, but there are actually things out there about that. There's zero on the kind of mission side of a project, kind of bigger question of what you're doing, why you're doing it. And there's very little on the systemic side, i.e., like, how is this building or this project actually transforming the organization, the Institute of Structural Engineers, for instance? How did this building change the way that the organization operated? So, in thinking about this and the way that we have kind of approached our projects, the first question we ask of our partners or ourselves, like, what is the mission of this project? Like, what are the broader ambitions of what we're doing here? And how at the end of the day, do we measure them? How do we figure out that we're actually achieving what we set out to do? And then as you drive directly across that, you're going to hit everything else. You're going to hit your environmental performance, or hit emotional satisfaction, which is, again, something not very measured. But these are things that are indirect, but not the direct reasons why a group builds a building, right? A group is building a building for something larger, something more aspirational than just, we want a green building, certainly. So, back to Carlo's words, contemporary architecture tends to confine ourselves. We're designers. This is what we do, right? And we've left ourselves out of what actually the whole process is, from the front end to just getting in the room and working with an organization or an individual to, like, help them envision what they want, right? That's even before planning and programming. And then ultimately, we have some role in construction, but how much say we have in it's fairly limited, I'd say, at this point. And certainly very little is happening in the occupancy point of it. So there's this wide spectrum of what we could be doing through a process of a project. And too often, I'd argue that, like, certainly in my profession, we arrive late to the party. Like, we're showing up at design, we're already, like, we've missed the two fundamental parts that precede it. And it's gonna set us back, and it's gonna limit ultimately how effective we can be. And so along these questions, like, what are the mission questions that we would ask the people we're working with? So how can a capital project support your institution or your group? Is this what you actually need to do? Do you need a building, right? How can design achieve impact? How can construction achieve impact? And kind of open these questions up to the people we're working with. So that was kind of where we started as MASS. It doesn't stand for Massachusetts. It stands for a model of architecture serving society, if you're interested. Our mission is very simple. That our direct mission is to research, build, and advocate for an architecture that promotes justice and dignity. That's a sample of our team. We're probably twice that these days, but as you can see, we're a fairly young organization. I think we've got about 14 different nationalities right now between our two offices. We do a lot of design. This morning, I don't know if you've had a chance in The Guardian, but pretty excited to say that the memorial in Montgomery, Alabama is opening today, and it's in The Guardian on the front page of the New York Times today. We design things, but we also, we research a lot. We want to think about that occupancy question, and also at the beginning, how can we work with organizations to think about those ends of the spectrum and help it feed back into what we're doing. So we do a lot of research, and as a nonprofit, a lot of the fundraising that we do supports that work, which otherwise would not be funded within a typical design practice. And we also advocate a lot, and I think this is a pretty unique part about what we do. Advocacy in this case was shooting a movie, which I'll show you shortly a trailer for, in Haiti about the cholera treatment center we did. Some of it could look very self-promotional, and certainly that helps when you're fundraising, but a lot of it is intended to work with the groups that we work with that ordinarily can't afford a building or can't afford design services, to bring the attention and the spotlight to them and their organizations and their fundraising. And so in this case, you'll see is JESCIO, which is a Haitian organization that's been dealing with tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS. These are some of the groups that we've been working with. So again, Equal Justice Initiative is the one today that we're celebrating in the United States. But certainly, the people that we team up with are friends at ARUP, where we're currently hanging out these days, and a range of you can see government and other NGOs and that we've worked with projects on. If you didn't know where Rwanda was, this is where it is, smack dab in the middle of Africa. It's where we started about a decade ago. it was a really good place to start an architecture and engineering firm, go figure. In that we're undergoing, a lot of population growth, obviously, and this is fairly well known, and there's a complete, dearth of design professionals. So great place to set up office, I would say. And needless to say, there's a lot of work in this part of the world coming, and certainly we recognize the need for training more capable people. Our first project was a hospital in this district. So, we were asked by Partners in Health to say, can you help us design a hospital in Barrera district? Sure, great, no problem. Let's do it and go up there. Never mind. There's no existing facility. There's no doctor yet. So this is the context of this project. It was formerly a military kind of outpost barracks on the top of the hills. This was the site beforehand, and a couple of years later, this is that hospital, which is kind of, I think, our iconic image as a firm. The hospital, in thinking about how to approach designing of a hospital, and I think Michael, our founder, he was a year into grad school at this point. So I'd say, suffice to say, probably didn't have the qualifications you'd think of someone to design a hospital. But what we learned is that you ask the people that use it what they need, and you talk to them a lot, and you ask the doctors, and you look at precedents, and you figure it out. And I think that's kind of just been our MO ever since. And one of the first things we like, one of the easiest decision-making things right away was, we're in this amazing landscape. There's not a lot of energy and a lot of money. And this image might be like, I don't know if it's evident, but this is about giving people dignity. Each of them gives privacy. They're not looking across at each other. They're looking out a window. They get to see this beautiful landscape that's out outside. And from an engineering and design perspective, all your gas and all your power is all in this wall. So you've halved all your MEP in the room and kind of put it in this narrow little wall instead of on both walls. So, might be subtle, but super important design decision that was arrived at through, constraint and looking at everything. Simple first principles across ventilation. Building does not have any air conditioning outside of the operating theater. So, again, we have the advantage of the world's perfect climate, so you can just open your windows 24/7, 365 days a year to do this, but really starting to think through the basics of passive ventilation and first principles of design, I'd say. This is what it looks like outside the wards. So, instead of the wards are small, keeping our gross square meters down, but we have this landscape outside. So we as much as possible, create outdoor space for people to get out into. The courtyard itself its campus is designed around this tree that the king used to hold court under. And that, create a beautiful landscape for people to walk out into. They're healing. This is a landscape that heals. So a big part of what we thought, or thinking about was all the corridors are exterior. They're not interior for disease control and infection control measures. Keep everything outside. Get people out into the outdoors. And this is a kind of overview of it. If you've not been to Rwanda, I always feel like I'm doing plugs for it, but this is your typical view, basically. The whole country looks this gorgeous, so come down. On the back of this project, seemingly a success, their Partners in Health is great, fantastic. All right, well, we need doctors here, right? So there were 0 doctors there before. So our second project, which on the back end of that was to build housing for doctors at the hospital. So it's about 2.5 hours outside Kigali, and the only way that they're going to attract and retain talent to work there was if they live there, and they wanted somewhere that a doctor coming across from London or Boston or wherever else would be feel comfortable. I'm going to live here for 6 months and train the doctor next to me. So we did doctors housing on the site, and again, very much a kind of in keeping of what could we build on site, and I'll get into that in a second. And subsequently, we did a second round of housing. This is for residents, so if you ever know anybody that's a med student that wants to go down to work with them, they would probably, this would be their dorm. Everything in the project was built on site. The first building we build is the workshop to everything else to get built in it. So everything you see in this image, including the hardware and the door, was made on site. And the kind of next ball that file after this is okay, great. We got a hospital, we got doctors. Okay, Dana-Farber came and said, let's look at cancer. There was no cancer treatment facility in the whole country. They decided to put it here. So that was kind of our next project. And this is kind of the snowball of a firm just kind of starting here. So we did a cancer treatment center, the first of its kind in the country. People come as far from South Sudan to get treatment here. This was a renovation and an extension of what was an old kind of barracks there. You can't really see much of it left, but this was the existing building, and we added on this butterfly structure over here. And you can see that the chair that someone would come in for chemotherapy will sit a few hours at a time in this comfortable chair looking out at the landscape and the gardens that they could walk into. So that chair was not made on site. That's the only thing that everything else was. In the making of this hospital, there were some just kind of lessons that, the anecdotes, again, I wasn't a part of this, but anecdotally, what I understood about it, the first decision made in the foundation and construction was, okay, we got to dig these trenches for the foundation. You can either rent an excavator, and it can come up from Kigali for the week for $2,500, or you can hire 250 people. Pretty simple answer to that question. And this is the kind of the first principle of okay, and that happened over and over and over again. You got a set amount of money. You are in control of the biggest investment in infrastructure this community has ever seen. You've got the potential to make sure that as much of it is left in that place, and that people are gaining skills and jobs. So that led to a series of decisions. What do we make this building out of? This is in the volcanic region of Rwanda, kind of like I've seen in Western Ireland, where stone is always coming up out of the soil, and they're kind of piling on the side. It's a waste. Get out of my farm, So you see this everywhere, and some people make walls out of it. Sorry, this is the contrast. This is the wall you would see driving around, and cement is the expensive material. So they're celebrating, hey, look at my wealth. I can afford cement, right? And we're on the other hand well, if that's the expensive material, labor's the cheap component. It's the inverse of, I'd say, the construction industry certainly here. Labor is the cheap component. Material is the expense. So maximize labor as much as possible, and you have this kind of obscene ability to do mass customization. So that was a decision early on and became the kind of icon of this project. Through this, kind of the tenets that we learned that we do now in all our projects was, first thing is hire locally. Second thing is source regionally, and some of this is just best practice or common sense perhaps, but in a lot of cases it's just you don't have a choice. You have to figure out how to get it locally. And we'll show you later on what we're currently doing. Train wherever you can. I mean, we're working in areas where we're trying to create more employment and get people skills that they can take on to their next project in a part of the world that construction is obviously happening in. That's Teo, one of our fellows at that point, teaching. You can see a room full of children. And uphold dignity. I mean, so much of it about is how our human relationship to the projects and the communities that we're in. How do we make sure that is always at the decision making of what we're doing? This is one of our schools that we built. So clearly, we've been doing all right with this. We get some recognition, and it was an interesting point in time. We're getting on the front page of the Times here, and it's kind of a segue over to. We were getting more and more work, and I think we were thinking to ourselves, okay, well, we can continue to work with, engineers in California in 10-hour time zone gaps, and they're donating their services to us, or we can, bring in our own engineering team and help build that part of our office to really support what we're doing. And it was this project that did this that Tim, ultimately, the seed of mass engineering, came on to help and started that. So I'll hand it to Rosie.
Thanks. As Faith said, I've been in Rwanda for 2 years now, and I lead the engineering team. It started out as a 12-month Engineers Without Borders placement, and this is why Engineers Without Borders work in this part of the world. We've got a huge capacity issue when it comes to engineers. I did a little comparison earlier about the number of registered engineers in the UK versus Rwanda, and it's such a huge difference. We've got 1 in 300 here versus 1 in 50,000 there, and we have the same infrastructure needs. There's also the fact that the IStructE, the ICE, we've had these institutions around since 1818, and in Rwanda the Institute of Engineers only set up in 2008, so there hasn't been a regulating body there around for long either. So as Kelly mentioned, the engineering team started a few years ago with Tim and Christian. Tim was on sabbatical from Arup for a year. And when he left, he put MAS in touch with Engineers Without Borders, which led to Louise joining in 2015, and a very small team expansion with Obed there. And then I joined in 2016, and we were able to hire Shakira. And now 2 years later, the team has tripled in size. And through our relationship with Engineers Without Borders, we've been able to expand to a multidisciplinary team and hire much more local staff. So we now have geotechnical engineers, civil engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and we've also got 2 Arup secondees that are over for 6 months for a particular project, giving expert advice. And we also have our own partners, obviously Engineers Without Borders and Arup, but we also partner with other engineering firms. And we do this because our team's not big enough to provide our own design review internally, so it's good practice for us to make sure that we get that technical review from another firm, and also to get particular advice on seismic design or certain innovative materials that we'd like to use. So when I first joined MAS, my first project was a site supervision project, and that really gave me some clarity into construction in Rwanda. And so there's certain challenges that we face. As you'd expect, safety is one of them. There's a lack of data, lack of published data into accidents in the construction industry. I'm assured by doctors that they happen frequently. But I think because they're not well advertised, people don't necessarily understand the danger that they're in. And a lot of the labour is unskilled, and they don't have any basis to demand better working conditions. So we make sure that on our sites now, we have a member of our teams now, our health and safety officer, who does monthly visits to make sure that both our staff and the contractor staff are safe, and that we're getting the client to buy into our initiatives. Quality. Now, often, as I said, the labour's unskilled, and there's a lack of decent equipment. But we do absolutely believe that high quality construction is possible with the right amount of training and supervision. And it's often just about setting up the right relationships with the contractor early on so they know what you expect. There's also a lack of engineering judgment. This was a site I was on where the contractor excavated far too close to the existing building. He was supposed to be a good 5 meters away from that, and didn't occur to him that that was an issue. So we have to be extra vigilant on site and just make sure we really understand everything that's going on, because this was a big concern for a few weeks until a retaining wall was built. Now, I love this image. This was from a contractor who poured concrete one day when I wasn't there, sneakily, but said, don't worry, Rosie, we did a slump test. And I think it probably took him longer to put this on paint onto a photo of the wrong angle than it would have done to actually do a slump test. And he didn't seem to understand that that might not be the only reason why I was concerned that he poured concrete when I wasn't there. So I think what we've kind of come to understand is that construction does require supervision 100% of the time. And so now we're entering into a period of unprecedented construction at the company. We've got more construction happening this year than we have for the last 10 years. So we've got a lot of responsibility in terms of site supervision. And so we've set up a training program to make sure that all of our engineers have the right support and training in order to do that appropriately. In terms of challenges in design in the country, it's a very hilly country, as you saw from Kelly's photos. So we've got lots of retaining walls, and lots of them fail. And there's also a decent amount of building collapses. Particularly recently, there's been a lot of storms, and we heard of just about 5 building collapses yesterday. So promoting structural integrity and good design is really important. And it's a seismic zone which isn't well understood. So as our engineering team has been small and we haven't necessarily been around for the whole of MAS's history, we have used other local consultants, and at times our engineering teams had to get involved to explain why we don't think their design is appropriate, which is another reason why we've been expanding so much to make sure that we can cover a lot more of MAS's work and make sure that we're happy that it's structurally sound. So back to the story of Butaro. After building the cancer patient ward, we realized that there were so many people coming from all over Africa to visit it. The next closest one is Nairobi. And as it's way up in the north, there's not exactly a wealth of hotels around. So we needed to design some patient housing. Partners in Health were concerned that a lot of the people coming for treatment were sort of sleeping rough, sleeping in the grounds of the hospital. So we designed a 2-story patient housing. It's a reinforced masonry structure with concrete frame and a masonry arch system on the front, and it has equally beautiful views. And so we really thought about how we would present the drawings, because obviously it is a complex design, but we believe it's absolutely possible to build. We just need to make sure that we give the contractor the right tools and details. So this was all thought through very carefully. In terms of reinforced masonry, this isn't a common construction method in Rwanda. So again, we had to be really careful with how we detailed it and how we explained it to the contractor to make sure that they understood the system. And the reason that we chose reinforced masonry is because it's a seismic region. And now one of the main issues is that there's a real lack of data into seismicity in this area. So you can see from these 2 images, this is about the highest kind of resolution we can get on Rwanda. And although there is a peak ground acceleration in the Rwanda building code, it's not appropriate for at least half of the country. And we have had to do serious research to figure out what values we should be using for different sites. And seismic design is not taught in university there, and not many people even use the value in the building code. So the work that we're doing in terms of training is really important. And this is Obed doing a modal response spectrum analysis, which he showed when he went for his chartership interview. And the interviewer was so impressed and asked him to send him these research papers he referred to, and was blown away that he really did real seismic design, which was great for Obed, because he passed with flying colours, but it doesn't give much confidence that the regulating body also just doesn't have that much experience in this area. And we also focus on a lot of other training initiatives. The universities don't teach seismic design, but there's also sort of no master's program. And there's a lot of other areas that we've identified that we can deliver good training on. So even sort of Excel workshops and technical report writing workshops, organizational skills workshops. And this particular photo is from a concrete mixed design workshop as part of our site training initiative. So I'll pass back over to Kelly now.
Yeah, thank you. So I think on the back end of all this work at Butaro, we were asked by the Ministry of Health of Rwanda to, we need 29 more of these. Can you give us a template, please? And that ended up in this body of work, which was essentially typical plans for what their hospitals were. And instead of just saying, they're used to saying, here's a set of blueprints and you can just like copy and paste them across the country, we said, no, it's more important that you understand the kind of basic DNA of a hospital and modify it to each site, because necessarily there'll be existing buildings there, there'll be existing hospitals or not. You have to think about how you plan around them and incorporate the expansion with what's there. And basic planning principles. And the target of this document is really kind of the in-house engineers and procurement officials of the Ministry of Health, so that they could correctly evaluate other designs. We certainly didn't want to design all of them. They said then, okay, can you test drive this, please? Let's show us what this looks like. So we built, or this is in construction now. We designed 2 hospitals, one in the rural south, a similar site to the Butaro hospital. So this is in construction right now. and one downtown Kigali. So these are kind of racing each other to the finish lines in both the application of these standards to radically different sites and contexts. In both cases, looking at materials like the brick, that there's a brick factory on the corner in Kigali versus the stone that's on the other project of that area. I forgot this. We then have like kind of airlifted this over to Liberia. So we're currently doing a new national hospital in Monrovia with the World Bank and the Ministry of Health there. This again, that basic kind of standard, but a slightly different form and a radically different climate, a lot more humid, a lot more, looking at stack ventilation to get this place cooled. The kind of interior of that, again, how the space can be quite open, airy, outdoors, really cut down on the HVAC again. And as a kind of transition to this and all this body of work that we had been working in Rwanda on, a few years ago we were invited to Haiti, and not after the earthquake. I think there was a big surge of activity and investment into Haiti immediately after the earthquake, and like how we're going to build back better was one of them, you might recall. And we came in, well after this, and we were invited by IStructE to come in, not because of the earthquake, but because of what happened after the earthquake, which was the massive outbreak of cholera. And to kind of contextualize this relationship to cholera, our good friend John Snow around the corner, not too far from here, tracing down the origins of cholera in London to a well in a specific neighborhood. And my wife happens to be in public health, and this is kind of like the beginning of her profession. But this is a kind of interesting thing about the spatial planning relationships of disease and health to planning and architecture and engineering, of course. So the Broad Street pump, famously, which you go there and there's like barely a plaque on the wall. There's like a brick in the sidewalk that says this is where that pump was. Such a significant part of the history of the city. And this was the Broad Street pump of Haiti, these guys, fairly well known at this point. The UN had come, famously, I think it was Nepalese UN workers had brought cholera to Haiti. It had not existed on the island for over a couple centuries. And that set up in the camps that were put there initially to house them, to house cholera. The contractors were then bringing the waste, the fluids out of these cholera treatment centers and then dumping them. This is like the best image we could find because they're kind of buried, but those contractors dumping them upstream of these of this little girl and the people that lived downstream from it. So you took something that was like kind of specific and not big, and how it was like totally mismanaged by international and national organizations, made it explode. And it exploded in this place, which was, Port-au-Prince used to stop right here. This is where the ocean used to come to. And that's all debris and fill and obviously informal development. And that's the project right there, just to contextualize it. And I'll just cut over to a video. So to help kind of bring attention to, this thing, yeah. As I mentioned earlier with the advocacy, we wanted to shine the light on this project in IStructE to get more funding to them to deal with this issue. So we made a movie.
I went into infectious diseases because I knew that they were the diseases that kill my people. I thought that this was a profession where you could actually do something.
Breaking news out of Haiti. A massive catastrophic earthquake has struck the country.
Tens of thousands of people.
200,000 dead. All that we have done within a few seconds were destroyed.
9 months after the earthquake, a new disaster in Haiti, an epidemic of cholera.
20,000 cases.
Up to 200,000 people.
Yes, there was a big earthquake, and then this cholera hit, but they were completely unrelated.
In Haiti, we need to hit cholera very hard. We need to make sure that the bacteria doesn't stay into our soil, into our water. Clearly, the infrastructure is key. There was always a sense that we could do better, to create a structure that would be adapted to the needs of the people and that would have some kind of dignity that is fully Haitian. Development does not rely only on health. Economic opportunities of education are also essential.
évolution. Et une évolution positive.
Oh, better turn that off.
I wa-
Um, oh. Yeah. So as you can kind of see through that, in the design of this building, the key thing was how you contain the cycle of infection. So that's through water and waterborne disease. So we made the roof to collect all the rainwater possible to then be the basic, the life of this building. And then everything that came out of it, all the waste that comes out is filtered on site in this like filter bed. So none of it is being contracted out. Nothing's going outside of the yard of this project. This is what it looks like from the street. And the inside, you can see here, it's counterintuitive to have in a tropical place, your roof have water come into the building, but that's what we decided to do. So it comes down through these trellises into this kind of underground filter bed. We designed the chairs. If you've seen what typical cholera looks like, it's certainly not pretty. You're lying on a bed and there's a lot of fluid coming out of your body very quickly. And it's from a kind of perspective of comfort and dignity and safety for the people that worked there. We worked hard with Herman Miller to design a chair that you could take the cover off very easily and wash and reuse, because actually the furniture was what was doing a lot of the transmission between patients. So we were thinking about how can we ground this building of the place? So this is the kind of buses and the things you'd see in Port-au-Prince and the artisanship that happens there. A lot of it is rolling out these old oil drums and beating this kind of ornate metalwork. So we found Mackenzie, one of these individuals that do this, to work with him to design the whole facade. And instead of doing a kind of like CNC robotic facade, that this is about privacy and cooling and screen, the whole thing was done by hand with him and his friends. To transition back to, I said, the African context, we, a few years ago, were approached by Baylor's Children's Hospital, I'm blanking on this, and Texas Christian, to work on maternal health in Malawi. The brief of this project is pretty interesting. It's a maternity waiting village. So in Malawi, in rural Malawi, if it's your first, fifth, or more pregnancy, you are required to travel to a district hospital to give birth. And you do this in your 8th month of pregnancy. So more often than not, this means you walk a great distance and then live underneath a tree for the last month of your pregnancy while you're waiting to then enter the hospital to give birth. Not ideal and dangerous. And what we were asked to do was come along in this context and kind of rethink the model that the Ministry of Health had. So this is what their hostel, the one place that they actually have one so far, this is what it looks like in plan, and this is what it looks like in the inside, and it's not much better than a kind of barracks or agricultural facility, I would argue. Not the kind of place that you'd want to spend the 8th month of your pregnancy. So we thought, if this is the model of what they've got, how can we improve this without making it more expensive? And the one thing that this does not look at is that more often than not, or all the time, these expectant mothers are also coming with at least one, if not more, caregivers. So though there's a bed for her, there's not a bed for her friend, her mother, and the people that are coming along with them. And this is a problem, again, like the cancer treatment center. It's not like there's a hotel that they can afford that's outside the hospital doors. So they end up just kind of camping on the lawn. We took this, we cut it apart. They're coming from villages. So how could we make this a kind of bit more broken down in scale, village-like? It's super hot and sunny in that part of Malawi. How do we extend the roof lines to create more shade? It's also very arid. How can we do the right things to do as far as rainwater capture and reuse? And they need to cook for themselves. So let's get a kitchen there. There wasn't a kitchen before. And what does this look like? So these aggregate into this kind of small little kasbah of housing here. And as you can see, it's 5 per room here, and there's like a kind of, this is one cluster of mothers here. So they have a group of 5 and a group of 15 and a larger group of, I think, 40 expectant mothers at a time. We pushed from a kind of design and structural engineering perspective. Actually, Tim did a lot of this here. Was we looked at using CEBs or CSEBs in the project and had to limit cement and steel as much as possible because of the construction cost confines. So we really pushed this column to do a lot more than just being a column, it becoming the furniture and a place for ultimately the mother and the friend to sleep outside underneath the roof. So kind of like sneak in housing for the others into the same envelope. This is what that looks like. As you can see, like during the day also, I mean, I've been a father for a month here. I can certainly appreciate that when you're 8 months pregnant too, you also are never comfortable. You're always moving around. And when I went to see this project, you can just like mothers in the like strangest positions, sitting on the stairs, on the laundry, on these little ledges, constantly moving around, and you get a sense of like the kind of dynamic community that is creating around the structure and the simple idea about extending the eave, really. And there you go. I mean, that's the kind of like getting comfortable and spending the day in the village. I think the other part that struck me upon visiting this project was this interesting part that the architecture, and this is a bit of an afterthought, is the community health workers that work there. They have the unique opportunity to teach family planning in this because they're far away from their husbands. So every day they have this kind of singing, dancing, and then education event that happens in the interior of this compound. And this is within a broader community, so it really feels like a kind of village within a village that is. It's open yet secure, and these women feel very comfortable at it, which otherwise they had been, certainly not that. And that's a kind of look at that project. What we, kind of back to this idea of accounting. So, we're working with our partners. How do we prove that the decision they made was the right one? Right? Hire mass versus just rolling out your standard template. Like, we're probably a little more expensive than just copy paste of this other thing. So how do we really justify that what we're doing is adding value? How is it actually performing better? So we worked with them to get a grant to do some research here to actually prove out, is this better? Like, are the results better? Does it improve health? Does it improve the outcomes of these women? And I kind of like the theory that we wanted to test here, at least the hypothesis was, if you came through the maternity waiting village, the mass version, you're more likely to have a successful birth, and you're more likely to refer everybody else in your village to come and do it, right? Because the need to come to the district hospital was the Ministry of Health's policy to target, maternal mortality at birth in complicated pregnancies. So, well, how do you prove this out? Again, you go and you ask a lot of questions, and we did a comprehensive survey through all the community health workers in both facilities to measure satisfaction with the facility. So these are the people that did the surveys for us, the women that worked there. We kind of put together this, working with I think a number of people to come up with like what are the right questions to ask here. So yeah, what's your background, your demographic, your pregnancy history, your perceptions of the facility, your spatial attributes. And you can imagine for most women, this was probably the first time they entered, were like evaluating the architecture that they were in. And I think it yielded some pretty interesting results and responses to it. And we kind of rolled it all together, put it into a big spreadsheet to figure out, okay, is it actually better? Results are a bit nebulous because it's not totally quantitative. It's very much also qualitative, sort of, okay, we need to go and talk to them too. So we sent out our interview kind of film team to then gather interviews of all the women or the workers that worked at these two places to compare them to each other again. So we're beginning to do this, and obviously I think this is going to take a long time to do, to really get a sense of the experience and like what's going on there relative to what the other is.
So the Rehehe Primary School project is what I've spent most of my last year doing, and it's pretty close to my heart. I'll just give a bit of background. We've got 40 million people in African cities at the moment, and when the population doubles in 2050, that will become 1.4 billion. And so what does this mean? This means we need an awful lot of infrastructure in order to deal with this number of people, and we've calculated that equals 700 million housing units, 310,000 schools, and 85,000 health centres. And we need people to design and build these facilities. So that leads to MAS's initiative to start the African Design Centre. Training has always been pretty core to what MAS do, and so in September 2016, we started a program for 11 ADC fellows for a 20-month program which takes them through the design and construction of a school as the core focus of the fellowship, but also a lot of other initiatives in terms of design, construction, professional practice, different softwares, history, why social architecture is important, to try and breed a group of responsible architects and engineers who can then go out and lead this big infrastructure boom. And so the project, which was at the heart of their fellowship, is in Musanze, up in the north. And this is the site. So it was an existing primary school with some pretty dilapidated buildings on the site there, as you can see. But in the most beautiful surroundings, it's got volcanoes in the background. And the buildings on the site were sort of, some were there since 1970, others have been built more recently in the Ministry of Education, typical school style. So these are some of the existing conditions of the buildings on site. Not ideal, and it's also very overcrowded. There's one teacher to every 53 students, and they have to go to school in 2 shifts. So there's a group of kids that go in the morning, a group of kids that go in the afternoon. There's about 1,000 children at that small school. And so firstly, they needed more classrooms, but also some of the existing classrooms were just really not suitable for the children anymore. And so then commenced a period of design. So this is Moses really trying to figure out the landscape here. And in terms of the structural system, what you see most places in Rwanda is this typical kind of concrete frame with masonry infill design. And it's not really been well adopted. Unfortunately, there's a lack of steel available in the country, and there's also a lack of appropriately dried and treated timber. So there's not many other options, but we encouraged the students to look at the options that there were. So a concrete frame that's actually seismically qualified. What can we do with the steel that we have access to? And then different masonry systems which might be a bit more seismically robust. And then we evaluated these against various criteria, obviously cost, structural integrity, carbon. And what we found was that for this scale of building, concrete moment frame actually gave us smaller concrete sections than the confined masonry system. We couldn't get the steel frame to work for the section sizes that we have. And what we decided was that because, again, it was in an area with a lot of volcanic stone, to avoid the use of fired brick, we would use the volcanic stone as infill. And therefore the moment frame was the most suitable option from a carbon perspective. But obviously it couldn't be done in the same way that they're currently being built. As you know, moment frames require quite special detailing to make sure they're seismically qualified, so we had to really think about how we presented our drawings to make sure that they were understandable to the contractor and really highlight the differences. So that's a render of the finished design. There's 6 new classrooms with also some outdoor classrooms in the space between, and we retained a couple of the existing buildings. And now there's a boundary wall which separates the school from the community, so that there's a bit more safety and security for the children, and the teachers know where they are. There's another render here showing the thought that's gone into the landscape to make it educational. And now it's in construction. So I get to go to this lovely site every week. We've got 4 wonderful women leading the site at the moment from Malawi, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda and Kenya. And these women fully manage the site and employ all of the labor, do all of the checks and control everything, and they're doing a wonderful job. And so we wanted to avoid construction like this, which is a photo from the previous project I saw, where we have terrible scaffolding and unsafe conditions. And now that we have full control of the site, we have a sea of scaffolding with toe boards and handrails, and it's all very exciting. We're also doing toolbox talks in a bit more of a low-tech fashion to try and explain to the low-skilled labour, why it is important to wear the hard hats we've been giving them and why certain people need to wear safety glasses and try and give a bit of information about the risks. Also making sure that we provide clean drinking water on site and look after the workers. And now it is hard for us to get quality materials. We actually have to hand crush on site all of the aggregate that goes into the concrete. So we are providing additional employment for these lovely ladies. There's one aggregate crushing machine at the quarry, but if you saw it and the conditions of dust that surrounded it, you'd understand why we prefer to go down this route. And we also suffer from a lack of equipment. So here we're pouring concrete via cut-off jerry cans. But we can achieve very high quality with wonderful safe access there. So you can see the volcanic stones again in use that have been cut and shaped and immaculately placed in there. We also try and keep the spirits high on the site with our Worker of the Week initiative. So this guy has just been awarded a tape measure for his hard work and efficiency. And we also take a lot of photos and pin them up so that people can take them home at the end of the week, because quite often they've never had a photo of themselves before. So I'll just let Kelly introduce this one.
Yeah, try to round it up. I know we're kind of getting close on time. Is the project that we're currently working with Arup expansively on, and a few other people, is a new ground-up school of agriculture. And this is a pretty exciting project where we got full control on from ground up. A campus for 250 students that are going to basically address this issue, which is 80% of Rwandans farm, and a quarter of those are food insecure because of issues of climate change and farming technology and just the state of agriculture broadly. And this is only going to be exacerbated. And clearly, we keep showing this 2050 slide as the good news and the bad news rolled into one. But how do we double food production on less land? The kind of the question of this project. It's situated in the south of the country. We show you the lush, verdant north of Rwanda more than once, and it's quite different as you cross the country. It rapidly changes into more of a savanna, which is more indicative of as you can see, the whole bioregion between Burundi and up into Uganda. So we figured if we can answer it there, it's going to really crack open questions of the broader continent. And the mission of this project is to train the next generation of leaders in this version of agriculture, not a kind of industrial ag, but a conservation ag, trying to really rethink agriculture from one health perspective and its relationship between animal, human health, and environmental health. Just a kind of view of how they're going to be teaching. Year one, everybody's going to work on a farm together, very much kind of kibbutz model, and then they'll move into specialties of different agricultural specializations. Kind of again, and how do you go about designing something that you've never done before? Partially, you go out and you just meet every farmer around and get a sense of what they're doing and kind of what currently looks like. These are the fishermen that are nearby. What are the cooperatives? How can you learn from the context? This is what the status of the plan right now. We're going to start construction in about a month. This afternoon we had a call to sign off on a $6 million solar facility. It'll be completely off-grid, which is very exciting. And the kind of bigger questions again is like, to the funder of this project, you're going to spend $120 million. What are you going to get for it? And I'd say that, the big thing would be the indirect impact of this investment and really thinking about how this is driving how we're thinking about this project. It's not just about the students, but it's about the maximum kind of outlay of what they're going to learn and go out into the community. Part of the beginning of this project, the first thing was the gatehouse on the property. So we engineered this in-house. It was our first. I'm Canadian, so I've got I always want to do stuff out of wood, I think, naturally. So we finally got our first wood construction in Rwanda, which was exciting. And I like this project in section as a Rwandan foundation. The wood is from Uganda and the thatch is from South Sudan. So we're really cutting a swath down East Africa with this project and its supply. Part of it was there's a company that's just set up shop in Rwanda too. There's a lot of trees there and they're not felled in the best way, I would say. So part of what we did a few weeks ago was go up to see their facility. They'd be the first FSC certified mill in the country. And so we're hoping to buy a ton of wood off of them, a few tons of wood off of them, for the roofing of this project, and get away from steel and make this the most kind of carbon neutral, if not positive, project possible. It's kind of looking at the design of this. So this is from off the hands of one of the Arab secondis that we've got down there now, beginning to look at simple ways of making these trusses to do fairly large spans for agricultural buildings. How these can then also with the housing. So you're beginning to see working with rammed earth, which is a new material for us as well, and understanding all the parameters around rammed earth and how we can go, multiple stories with it. Again, this is what our engineering team is working on right now. Part of it was also just going out there, sampling. We're hoping to use the soil from the site, literally outside the campus, to build it. So part of going down there, doing the tests necessary, getting a good sense of what's possible with it, and really kind of getting our hands dirty, so to speak. And this was a couple weeks ago. We had the pleasure of Arab hosted. A few of our Rwandan engineers came up to spend the week here to work with the team and get a sense of this context. And I'll leave Rosie to comment on their experience, and we'll open it up.
Yeah, this is going to be our future album cover. So no, it was really great for the team to really experience and feel what good design is, and be in the presence of a large engineering company. We did a lot of workshops, met a lot of experts, and it was a really fantastic experience for the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.